Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 50th video session over here on Impaction. Today, we're joined by a couple of awesome community members, a great presenter to commemorate the event, to commemorate the 50th video session that we have at Impaction. But before we get started with the interview, we're going to, go through what we do at Impaction and the purpose of these video sessions in the first place. Essentially, we're just trying to get more people involved in the social impact space by lowering the barrier to entry and ultimately making the space more accessible, especially for young people and people who want to make a difference. So that's why we're here today. That's why we're here for our video session today, just to connect people across 50 different countries and solving challenges for real world social entrepreneurs who are solving and trying to aim to solve real world challenges around the world. So that's why we're here. So we're gonna go forward and introduce the people on the call. I'm gonna start with myself. I'm Shivani Choksi, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Impaction. I'm based here in Chicago, Illinois, and I also work in Chicago Public Schools as an analyst. So I'm gonna ask Jasmine to introduce herself first.
Hi everyone, I'm Jasmine, she, her, hers. I am a teacher resident at Ogden Academy here in San Antonio ISD, and I'm going to be doing 4th grade math, so super excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Jasmine. Chris, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you, Shivani. My name is Chris Bennett. I'm the founder of TIL, which is Technology, Innovation, and Law. We're a social impact startup in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to make it easier and less costly for marginalized and underserved creative entrepreneurs to protect and to monetize their innovation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Chris. Kayla, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Kayla. I'm also based in Chicago studying political science, and I hope to do work with creative expression and allowing people in a variety of communities to build their confidence and do the work that they want to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. And Melissa, I'm going to introduce you and your work, and then you can go right into your introduction and your presentation. So yes, today, like I said, we're celebrating our 50th video session. And to commemorate the event, we're speaking to Melissa Diamond and learning about her journey at A Global Voice for Autism. Melissa is a social entrepreneur with a deep commitment in developing cross-border solutions that improve lives. She founded and scaled A Global Voice for Autism, a social venture that has equipped 14,700 individuals in refugee and conflict-affected communities to support autistic children with developmental disabilities in their classrooms, homes, and communities. Melissa has consulted for and managed projects at numerous organizations, including the International Organization for Migration in Cairo, Egypt, the Melissa Network in Athens, Greece, and a healthcare interpretation agency for immigrant populations in Minnesota. Melissa is an internationally recognized public speaker and has presented on global stages, including the first Global Congress on Conflict Medicine in Beirut, Lebanon, at Rotary International Convention in Hamburg, Germany, and 2 presentations at the United Nations headquarters in New York City for World Autism Day. Wow, Melissa, you've done so much, and we're so excited to have you here today. Do you want to, introduce yourself and also just share your screen and present on your organization?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. As Shivani mentioned, my name is Melissa Diamond. I'm the Executive Director and founder of A Global Voice for Autism. And A Global Voice for Autism is an international nonprofit organization that works with conflict-affected communities and equips these communities with the tools to support autistic children, as well as children with developmental disabilities in their classrooms, homes, and communities. We do this through a few different types of programming. First, we provide joint caregiver and teacher trainings. These trainings bring together teachers who are interested in inclusive education, as well as parents of autistic children and children with developmental disabilities, to learn side by side about evidence-based practices for inclusive education and autism support. The teachers and parents then work together in cooperatives, where they work with each other's children on the skills they've been learning in the training to help children make progress, help them generalize their skills by working with different caregivers, and also to help the teachers and parents work on their skills and generalize their skills for better performance. We also provide peer support and self-development groups. We do this with siblings, parents, as well as educators, as we know that sometimes the experience of being a caregiver of an individual with a disability can be a stressful experience, and it can also be an experience with unique joys and celebrations that other people might not understand. All of our peer support and self-development programming focuses not only on creating a safe space for siblings, parents, or educators of children with autism to discuss their experiences, but also on building confidence and engaging in activities that help the individuals in the support group hone their own strengths and really align themselves with their personal mission and purpose. We also offer social skills and inclusion programming. Here you'll see a picture from our event, Jordan's First Autism Inclusive Carnival. Here, in a community in northern Jordan where there was high autism stigma that was preventing many families from accessing services, we set up a carnival with 12 different carnival games. We had over 500 people from the community come to the event, and each individual was given a scorecard. They could go from game to game, and at each game, they would learn a fun fact about autism. They would then answer a question. So, for example, a fun fact might be, some people with autism don't use words to communicate, but that doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. Tell us about a time when you've had something you wanted to communicate, but did it in a way without using words. And the child might say, oh, I was upset that my mother wouldn't give me candy yesterday, so I started crying. After they got the answer, they thought about the question, they would get a stamp on their scorecard and could then play the games and earn prizes. We also offer social skills groups for children with and without disabilities in the community, where in a smaller group than the carnival, they play games with each other and work on opportunities for social interaction that aren't just about teaching people with disabilities to interact in the way that other people in their community interact, but also focused on teaching children in the community to think differently about what it means to play with someone and what that play could look like. We also engage in various education and inclusion advocacy events. Here, you'll see a picture of a child who is helping to paint a mural on the wall outside of the girls' secondary school in Hartha, Jordan. For this, we brought the children, parents, siblings, volunteers, and teachers in our program together and painted an autism inclusion mural on the wall outside the school, which explained autism as well as some of the positive characteristics, and then talked about the value of inclusion. And there was a world with a bunch of children around it in the center, and then on the edges, the children in our program got to put handprints and paint as they wanted on the sides. And then on the other side, you'll see, this is actually a picture of me at the Global Forum on Migration and Development, speaking about shifting refugee narratives and reconceptualizing what it means to provide support to a population and instead focusing on providing support alongside a population. We also have robust community networks that allow parents and teachers around the world to connect with others who share their linguistic and cultural backgrounds to discuss their experiences raising children with special needs. This is a picture from our program in the Somali community in Minneapolis. And this program was run both in English and Somali, so that parents who didn't speak English and or had arrived in the US more recently could participate alongside parents who had been here for a longer time, while also strengthening their English skills and working on that to help with integration in the United States. We also have a very large Arabic community network for Arabic speakers, refugees in Turkey, in Jordan, in the Palestinian territories, and in the United States, who are able to connect through that network to share resources and experiences. And most recently, during COVID-19, as we've had to pivot and make sure that our programs are accessible in the new context, we've launched the Include 2020 COVID-19 Response Initiative, which has recently been recognized by a number of organizations, including 100, Open IDEO, as well as One Young World and the Clinton Global Initiative. Our program understands that during COVID-19, families have a number of intersecting needs. And so simply providing educational support is not going to be enough for many of these families. 41% of our families are experiencing food insecurity since the start of COVID-19, and 39% reported an incidence of domestic violence at home in the first 2 months of the pandemic. As part of our Include 2020 initiative, we have a confidential emergency support fund that families can apply to meet their in-kind needs. And so this includes things like getting their electricity bills paid, getting grocery store gift cards or in-kind food donations, so that they can meet their needs and ensure that they are safe and able to stay in their homes. We also provide group trainings and individualized consultations that focus on skills that parents and teachers have identified as top priority areas during this time. So we've recently had trainings on things like addressing self-injurious behaviors, designing activities to do with your children during the pandemic, and toilet training, which were 3 of the top needs. And we're getting ready to offer communication training for families who are working on increasing their children's communication abilities during this time. And finally, you'll see the picture here. We're getting ready to launch our Include 2020 mobile application, which employs refugee teachers who have been trained by a Global Voice for Autism to produce virtual inclusive education content. All of it, here's an English mock-up that I shared because I assumed that most of you would probably speak English, but the entire app is actually in Arabic. So families can access content that has been designed, not just translated, but designed in their native language with their cultural context in mind to provide support to their children in areas like academic skills, independent living skills, as well as enrichment. The users of the app get to access the app for free, but so that we can collect data and ensure that we can continuously improve the app to meet their needs, they unlock new videos by taking quizzes after they've watched the video. And so here you can see a sample of a video. This one was for, I believe this is the video for toilet training. And so the parent can watch the video. They can see, here's the process they have to follow. After they take the quiz, which shares both about their child progress, as well as their own user experience and how easy the process was to understand or any feedback they have. And then they're able to unlock a new video. In this case, it's part of a series, so they'll unlock the second step in the process. But in other cases, like the enrichment activities, they'll just unlock a new block of activities they can use. And then, as I mentioned, the entire app is being developed in Arabic, but we've already been talking with some other communities about the potential for expansion, including a Spanish-speaking community, as well as the Somali community that you saw earlier, to see how we might be able to expand this app and develop it in other languages to meet the needs of more populations. So that's my whole presentation for today, and I look forward to your questions. Please feel free to stay in touch. As a quick note, our website server crashed yesterday, and so both our email and website are down right now, but we're hopefully working on getting that back up and running today. So that's what I was off doing at the beginning if you were getting started, but please feel free to reach out once that is back up. And thank you, everyone.
Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started with this idea? And we know a little bit about your background, but we would just love to learn a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So I established the Global Voice for Autism in 2012 after meeting a family that locked their daughter with autism at home due to the shame and stigma in their community, as well as the lack of resources. And when I met this mother, she approached me and asked me for help. And I initially, what her request had been was to help her daughter get a scholarship to get services in the United States. So I returned home from the place where I met the woman, and I started contacting every autism center I could find, and some of the biggest organizations in the US to see whether such a scholarship might be possible. And everywhere I contacted, the answer was the same, which was that there are so many children with autism in the US who are in need of these services and can't afford them, that there simply are not scholarships for children from other communities internationally who need that support. And along the way, as I continued to speak with the mother, it became clear to me that if she was hiding her daughter with autism at home due to the shame and stigma in her community, there were likely others doing the same. And so that was really the point that catalyzed my journey. And initially, I started thinking about how we could set up a program within her community to train parents to support each other's children, and also to bring them together to address some of the isolation that she was experiencing. Over time, A Global Voice for Autism grew to support siblings as well as teachers, as well as to do more community advocacy, as we started engaging further with the communities and really understanding what the needs were at a deeper level. Something else that I'll note about A Global Voice for Autism is all of our programs directly respond to an invitation from a community. And so we never identify a community and say, oh, it looks like you don't have any autism services. Can we come and help you? Instead, we wait for the communities to reach out to us, because we're not trying to deliver our intervention in as many contexts as possible, but rather trying to meet communities' needs and meet them where they are. And so every one of our programs looks a little bit different based on what that community's needs are, and in order to ensure that we're providing content that's both culturally relevant, but also that meets the community's specific needs.
That's really important about what you said about meeting the community where they are, especially if you're working internationally. So you don't do more harm than good when you're helping that said community base. So that's really important. Can you tell us a little bit about, your team members? Are they situated internationally as well? Because they may have like a clear idea of what that community initiative or that need means as well. And, how big is your team as well? So just want to learn a little bit more about the people behind this work.
Yeah, I think I'll also have a question after that. Maybe she can just, sorry guys, I'm late, but yeah, I think I'll have a question after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So we're lucky to have a very large team that's very international in nature. We currently have 76 volunteers and contract staff based in 26 countries around the world. Many of those individuals are on the ground in the communities that we serve. We have 13 communities where we work on the ground, as well as 4 communities where we work virtually, and that we have never been able to provide on the ground support due to the high conflict nature of those communities, but we still support families in the community.
I mean, like in our country, I'm working on a project that is involving accommodation for the disabled children in preschool. We are faced with a challenge currently whereby some children with physical disabilities or children that are facing disabilities are sent back home because of the distancing rule, because of the covered 1 meter distancing. So they can't have a lot of kids together in one preschool. So the biggest challenge on this side is more of getting sample accommodations for them. Now, I'm not sure as to once you give them accommodation, obviously programs have to follow. You don't want children sitting in accommodations with no education material. So I was just thinking into how can we merge, or how can we request for support from your federation or from your organization rather?
Sure. So in terms of requesting support, different communities typically submit a proposal to us. And so we will have our email back up and running. And we need a registered community organization that's committed to the project sustainability after we come in and do the training. And once that organization reaches out to us, our next step is typically conducting a needs assessment in order to ensure that the community meets our criteria in terms of being a conflict-affected community, as well as having needs that we are equipped to support with our programming. And then finally, when we work with the community organization, they are responsible for procuring a portion of the funding that makes the program possible. As we, at the end of the day, we provide the services at no charge to the families and teachers, but we do need that partner organization within the community that's able to provide that support. And so those are some of the things we look at when we evaluate the request. And typically, if we get the initial request and it looks like it could be a good match, we'll set up a conversation with the primary stakeholders in the partner organization to start looking into the needs of that community deeper and to see whether it's a partnership worth building on, and that makes sense for both sides.
Sure, thank you for that, Shivani. And Melissa, appreciate the presentation. My ask, has your organization identified a need for children at the preschool level for autism type services, or is that too soon for a diagnosis?
Okay, so children in an environment that is prepared and well educated to identify autism, children get diagnosed as early as 18 months. And so to the greatest degree possible, it's best to start interventions at that time. As the earlier these interventions are started, the more progress the child will have the opportunity to make. And so preschool support is definitely a need, both in terms of identification as well as in terms of actually getting started, both in the classroom and at home with the caregiver. Our programs work with children between the ages of 3 and 11. And children, if they have a diagnosis at an earlier point, they're very welcome to start with us. However, we find that in the communities where we work, awareness is typically lacking, and so diagnoses are coming later. And many children don't get diagnosed until 3 or 4 years old. But yes, as you mentioned, the earlier it's possible to get autism identified and to get these services started, the better.
If I may ask a brief follow-on, and I'm going to apologize for some background noise. My partner is doing another meeting in a room, and she's the CFO at a preschool here in DC. And that's relevant because one of her colleagues is a retired physical therapy teacher who has a unique teaching methodology called Finger Fun Club. And she's translated into Arabic and also into Amharic. And she wants to donate that to organizations. And National Childhood Research Center, which is where she worked previously, specialized in hands-on care for children with special needs. So I was wondering if there might be an opportunity for something like her methodology being donated to your organization and using it in your inventory in case you identify a situation where it might be helpful.
That's certainly something we can discuss. One note about our organization is there are so many practices out there that claim to be beneficial for children with disabilities and children with autism. And so we're pretty careful about the methodologies that we implement. We only implement methodologies that have been well established as evidence-based practices for support. And even if something looks promising or has a number of case studies, and I don't know what the case is with this curriculum, it may be something that has a lot of evidence behind it. But we've been approached previously with methodologies that have, say, parent testimonials or maybe some very early stage research indicating positive outcomes, but without the evidence base. And we don't take on any of those curriculums, as we're very careful that everything we're implementing is evidence-based. And this is particularly important in the communities where we work that have limited resources, as there are many organizations out there that are claiming to provide support, charging families fees for this support, and basically offering practices that have zero evidence base for doing anything for children. And so in order to build credibility, as many of the families that come to us have been taken advantage by such services, it's very important that we have that evidence base that we can point to, and also that we can feel good about the services we're providing, knowing that they're strongly evidence-based and rooted in that practice. But I'm happy to talk offline later if you think it's something that could be a match.
Thank you, Melissa. I mean, for your, it seems like you have, a very clear framework in mind as to, the organizations and the people that you work with. Do you have, some sort of background in, or like some sort of like previous history with a potential funding opportunity or a partnership that didn't match your criteria and like had an adverse effect on some of the communities that you work with? Do you have like any experience with that in the past?
I do, but because this is being recorded, I can't share that story.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. So when you're talking more about the evidence-based practices, can you tell us a little bit more about your impact metrics? And I know that you have, a global reach, 14,000 people plus, but can you tell us more about the depth and, the depth of your services?
For sure. So something else that's very important to us as an organization is measurable impacts. And we want to ensure a child served or a teacher taught is not just a number, but has data behind it and actually produces a tangible impact in the community. And so we utilize a number of metrics targeted at caregivers, teachers, siblings, and the children with autism themselves. Some of these include, on the parents, we measure parental activation, which is a measure, it's called PAM, the Patient Activation Measure, which is available both for the parent themselves as well as the parent's ownership of the child's care. And essentially, what this measure looks at is how much ownership that parent takes over their own and their children's outcomes. And it's a very strongly evidence-based and validated measure, and we've been able to actually see changes by, and these are all correlation, not causation at this point, but see a correlation when a parent goes through our program, their activation level can increase. And they start to take more ownership over their personal outcomes and their child's outcomes. We also look at parent stress levels, particularly around parenting stress, as the parents we work with often have a number of different kinds of stress in their lives. So we can't say, well, it reduced their stress as a whole, but we reduce their stress as far as parenting is concerned. Like the PAM with all of these measures, we do baseline assessments, and then we assess in the middle of the program, at the end of the program, and 6 months following. We also, in terms of the child, we have a number of areas. There are 36 areas that we look at in terms of their communication skills, social skills, and independent living skills development. And so that's something else we look at. We look at reports related to sibling relationships, as well as sibling self-confidence. And then we look at teachers and their practical learning outcomes, their teaching stress levels, as well as a number of other measures that measure the skills that they've actually acquired and how they've implemented them into the classroom. And typically, with both the teachers and the parents looking at their skill retention and application, we have both a theoretical test, which they can either take written if they're able, or as some of our parents are not able to read, they can sit with somebody and we'll read the test out loud to them and they can answer the questions verbally. And then we also have a practical test where we actually have the teacher or the parent with their child or a group of children, and they're applying the skills, and we watch for the strategies that we've been teaching them to see how well they've retained those. And so those are, I'm happy to talk about specific outcomes, but those are just a few of the metrics we look into.
No, that sounds awesome. Can you tell us more about the practical test? I mean, what sort of skills are, the kids learning, and yeah, how are you measuring that?
Yeah, so the practical test looks very different from group to group and family to family, as every child comes to the program working on different skills. An example from our Jordan program is we had a group of teachers and parents, and during the first week, they're divided into cooperative groups, which were 2 families and 2 teachers who worked together throughout the sessions, and they met every week in a group. And so with one particular child, one of the skills we were working on was getting him to request by pointing. He didn't use any verbal language, and at the time he came to us, didn't use any sign language. And so as a first step in the communication process, we wanted to teach him to point to the things that he wanted. And so in that particular group, as they were doing the practical test, teachers as well as the parent were primarily working on, one, creating fun opportunities for him to point to things and find things that would motivate him, like bubbles, or there were tubes that make a noise when you stretch them out that he really liked, or playing tag. Just various activities that would motivate him to engage in the pointing behavior. We were also looking, in this particular test, we want to make sure that the caregivers and teachers are using positive reinforcement and are not doing things like yelling no at the child or stop that. We want them to be redirecting them with positive instructions and telling them do this rather than don't do this. And so on the practical test, you can earn points for giving positive instructions, and you can get points deductions every time you tell a child not to do something or yell at them. There are also things related to physical prompting and doing that in an appropriate way, keeping the child engaged throughout the session. But one thing to note is every child is different. Naturally, children might get tired. They might have good days, they might have bad days. And so the practical test is not based on how well the child performs, but how well the teacher performs and responds to the situation and wherever the child is at that day.
Wow, this is incredible, especially the level of ownership that you're providing not only the child, but the teachers and the parents as well. I mean, the amount of accountability that you're, installing in the community itself. That's awesome. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions? I'll open it up to the community.
I had a question. So you talked a little bit about the process for this kind of work, right? A community applies, it has to be an organization that is taking on the responsibility of seeing this through so that it is sustainable. What does the entire process look like though? So like, how long on average does a community take during the application process? And then what happens after you find that community? Is it like a one-time visit or a one-time kind of workshop, or is it like a specific set number? Is it based on the community, that kind of thing?
Sure. So that process varies community to community. And some factors that influence that is how strongly affected is the community by conflict. We're working with conflict-affected communities. Is this a place that's easy to go in and out of for that planning process? Is that a place with regular internet access? And so our partners there can jump online and have conversations with us. Is that a place where the context is changing so rapidly that we need to wait until closer to the program implementation date in order to design anything and ensure that it's still relevant to the community? And so that process does vary quite a bit. But just as a general overview, typically the community reaches out to us. We conduct the needs assessment. And after we conduct the needs assessment, we have both a curriculum development team as well as an implementation team. And the curriculum development team works with the local stakeholders on the ground to do assessments, understand the family's needs, understand the teacher's needs, understand the broader community needs and context. And they work with them to provide their curriculum development expertise in partnership with our local team's local context expertise to design a curriculum that meets that community's needs. With the caveat that there are always small adjustments to these curriculums, or sometimes large adjustments, once we actually get to the situation on the ground as needed. And so we never carry out a program just because we wrote that program and we want it to happen that way. But we make adaptations sometimes on a daily basis, depending on the actual context and dynamics within the community. And so one example of that, when we were working in Jordan, prior to arrival, we had 30 families who signed up. And we got there, and all 30 of these families said, oh yeah, we'll be there tomorrow at the center. We gave them each an intake time, and only 8 of the families showed up. And we were trying to figure out why this was. And so we kept calling the families. Our local coordinator was getting in touch with them. And what we found out was They wanted the services, but they were afraid to walk down the street and be seen with their child with special needs as they were walking to the center, as it's in a small village, and people see each other walking down the street and people gossip, and there's a lot of stigma. And so in that particular case, while we did keep working with those 8 families, we also took a step back and said, what can we do to address this underlying problem, which is that there are all of these other families who need these services, but the stigma is still so strong. And so that was, you saw the picture from the Inclusive Carnival in Jordan. That was one of a series of activities we designed that targeted the whole community to educate about autism, but also to create safe and inclusive spaces where these families could come that were centered around them, but open to everybody. And so we had the carnival, we had a field day, we had a community cleanup day that brought out over 100 elementary school and secondary school students to clean up the community with children with developmental disabilities and without. And so we implemented this series, which had not been a part of the original program plan, after seeing the issue of the stigma. And what we found was that after the implementation of this series, we had more families who were willing to come out to the program, who felt comfortable. Many of those families who did not feel comfortable coming to the center felt comfortable attending these events that were explicitly marketed to the community around their children being special and their children being valuable to the community. And so we'll make those adaptations as well. The in-person training program typically lasts for 12 weeks once it's implemented. We've had a few communities where it's been a little longer. We've had one community where it was shorter due to a program site evacuation after some political unrest. But after that initial training is complete, families transition, and teachers as well, into a virtual support program. And this, we ask them to participate for 1 year, but we have families who have been in it since 2014 and they haven't made a move to get out of it. And so we welcome them in as long as they want to stay and find it valuable. And in this program, they're paired with a virtual support consultant, and they're able to film videos at home of different behaviors that they're working on or skills they're working on, and send those videos to the consultant. The consultant provides feedback, and then they continue to work and take new videos to go back and forth like that throughout the week. Or some of our teachers will do this with their classrooms, typically filming from the back so they don't identify the students' faces in a classroom environment, but they're still able to get that feedback on their teaching process and work on specific skills.
Yeah, Jasmine, absolutely. Yeah, Kayla, go for it.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted. I wanted to ask about, it seems like this is such like a complex, like thought out process of how to do this organizing, especially in areas where there's quite a bit of conflict or stigmatism. So how did you start this organization and create the structure? Also because there's people working in this organization from 25 different countries. It just seems like a lot, and I'm not sure how you got it started.
So this might not be a satisfying answer, but it sort of grew organically. Initially, I went to visit this family and learned a bit more about what their needs were and what their experience was like. And it was out of that experience that, in addition to the initial idea of the parent training program, we added the idea of having a sibling support program, having a parent support program, as well as having education for teachers and community members to address the basics of autism and community inclusion. After that program, the United Nations heard about the program and invited me to give a speech at World Autism Awareness Day, as this was a new model that had never really been done before. That attention for the organization at the United Nations, many different communities around the world started reaching out and asking for our program. And so we really grew quickly from there. We implemented one more program that was focused primarily around parent training and family support. However, during that program, we started getting lots of requests from schools in the community for education for their teachers. And they wanted that education at a deeper level than just learning this is what autism is and this is why inclusion is important. And they wanted to learn how to actually do that inclusion. And at the same time, many of our families said, well, this is great that we have this community, but we want our children to be able to go to school. And so after that program, that was when we started to integrate the inclusive education component for teachers. And we figured out that by bringing teachers to come learn alongside parents, these two groups could actually support each other, because the teachers had the educational expertise, but the parents know their children better than anybody else and had some of the more autism-specific expertise in terms of supporting a child with autism. And so we brought them together for that learning. And then in Jordan, as I mentioned more recently in 2018, really expanded upon that inclusion component in order to ensure that families would feel comfortable coming out to the program, but also to ensure that community members really knew how to implement this inclusion, not just in the classroom, but also in the community. And what we found was when we first started the program, kids in the community in Jordan, as I mentioned, this took place in a small village, so everyone kind of knows each other, everyone talks, whether to each other or gossiping or whatnot. And at first, kids would sort of make fun of kids with autism and kids with disabilities. And they heard a lot of that from their parents. In fact, every child who I ever saw make fun of a child with a disability, they never came up with that on their own. They typically said something nice at home, and then their parents made a joke, and so then they brought that joke back out to the street. And so a big part of our program was working with those kids to make it cool to have friends with disabilities, make it cool to have friends with autism. And by about halfway through the program, we'd have children from the village lined up outside our center saying, we want to play with the kids with autism today. We want to go roll around in the field with them. We want to do this. And it became one of their favorite activities to play with their friends. And they came up with all sorts of games. They'd do magic carpet rides. They go to each other's houses and sit on the carpet and pull each other around up the floor. We had a child who really loved rolling in the grass, so they'd go into the playfield and they'd just roll back and forth from one side to the other for hours. And one thing that we found was that those prejudices, one, always come from the parents, but kids just want to play. And so that's another big component we've really worked to integrate into all of our work going forward, is it's so easy to teach a child to include another child. And so we've really been placing a lot more effort there as well to create communities that are inclusive from the ground up.
So I have one more question. Actually, I have two more questions before we wrap up. That's actually amazing. What does the next 5 years look like for you? What does success look like for you?
That is a very good question. I wish I knew the answer. So as far as the Global Voice for Autism is concerned, we're in a period right now where we're really seeking to grow. We have an evidence-based model. We have the data behind it. We have articles published in academic journals that show that what we're doing works. But one of the challenges we often face is getting funding, because we're not focused on a specific area. We're not in-depth cultural experts in, say, Jordan or Uganda or Brazil, but we work with different communities around the world. And so in some ways, it's been a challenge to find ongoing funding for the organization that will support us as we grow, no matter where we grow to. And so that's a big goal in terms of the next 5 years, is to find more sustainable funding sources to sustain and grow the organization. In terms of me personally, I do hope to remain involved in the organization, but I do hope to be able to turn it over to somebody else to run on a day-to-day basis in order to be able to work on other ventures, as I think all organizations have a lot to benefit from getting new leaders in place and new thought leadership. And also I have some other projects and ideas that I'd really like to work on. But I definitely see myself in the long term remaining a social entrepreneur. And while I have been looking into some opportunities to work with other people and learn from them because I think that's very valuable. My dream and my ideal is to be able to run my own thing.
Amazing.
Okay. No, that's a good question. I just wanted to add up to Shivani's question. Your long-term goals. Um, Tell me, in how many countries are you having trouble getting ongoing funding? How many countries, like plus minus?
So it doesn't really work like that. We have different project sites and we get funds project by project. And so some of those funds support multiple projects, some support an aspect of a certain project. In some communities, that community funds the project and we provide the support. And so it really varies community by community. And typically getting project support is less of an issue. The greater challenge is getting infrastructure support in order to support staff, in order to support development, in order to support the processes, like fine-tuning these programs so that they truly meet the needs of every community. And that's where the funding challenge comes in, because we're not just an organization that works in one community, but we're an organization that wants to build an infrastructure where we can respond wherever we're needed when it meets our criteria.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. My last question is, what are your asks? What are your needs from us as a community?
Well, if any of you are aware of communities that are in need of our programming, please feel free to make recommendations or connections. As well as if any of you do know of any funding opportunities or people who may be interested in this work, it would be wonderful to get connected with them to see how we might be able to move forward in partnership to make these services more accessible in communities around the world.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the video session today. I want to share one last bit of information as a call to action. So Melissa has posted on the idea forum right over here. If you guys have any other thoughts or questions or want to share your work, feel free to comment on her post on our idea forum, www.myimpaction.com. And also, I've done a quick search on our website, on our innovation news. There are a lot of resources and tech around autism in the first place. And I think Melissa might be doing a more comprehensive sort of service than, just creating a basic app, but it's also, it's great to just hear other ideas and what other people are doing around the world. So we have the innovation news and the idea forum, for your taking if you're interested in, looking at more of the ideas surrounding the work that Melissa is doing as well. I'll send out a follow-up email for everyone who joined the call. But thank you guys so much for joining. Melissa, thank you for your amazing work. We're really excited to follow you along in your journey.